Hello everyone, and welcome to the weekly DeSmogCAST, where we clear the PR pollution that clouds climate science and shed some light on the biggest environmental stories that you need to know about. I am your host, Farron Cousins, and joining me this week we have Carol Linnitt, the Managing Editor and Director of Research for DeSmog Canada, and Justin Mikulka, contributing writer for DeSmogBlog.com. Thank you both very much for joining us this week. And Justin, I want to jump right off with you. A couple weeks ago, we had discussed that the Obama administration was essentially kind of through the back door allowing oil companies to export some of their product. And as we know in the United States, we have this big export ban. It's been in place since the 1970s. But now that oil prices, gas prices in the United States are falling to lows that we haven't seen since almost 2002 levels, oil exports once again ramping up. Tell us what's going on.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, at the end of 2014, what the Obama administration did very quietly made some changes to policy that allow the export of light crude oil from the U.S. Now, the administration was adamant through their sources that this was not a policy change because, and the reason that is because no politician wants to be associated with lifting the crude oil export ban, because polls show it's very unpopular with voters. Because it's seen as a way to potentially raise gas prices, which is something politicians want to avoid being associated with. So the administration was saying, "Oh, this isn't a big deal." Some industry reports were saying, "Not such a big deal." But to really see the impact and how quickly this change, which was made on December 30th, has changed the markets. What you want to look at is the price of oil internationally versus the price in the United States. And the reason oil companies have been so interested in lifting the export ban is oil has been worth a lot more on the international markets. Typically, the international market is priced in Brent, is the term. So Brent pricing would be significantly more than the West Texas Intermediate, which is the U.S. priced oil. And so over the past several years, you'd hear about the Brent WTI spread, which meant, a couple years ago, a barrel of Brent, you could get $28 more per barrel than a barrel of West Texas. So this is a huge amount of money and significant motivation for the industry to take oil in the U.S. and sell it on the global market. So that was their motivation. A year ago, that spread was about $15. And now, over the past year, producers, even though the export ban is in place, producers have been finding ways to get around, even before Obama made the changes he did. So exports have been up to already a 500,000 barrels per day in November, setting a new record for U.S. exports. So that Brent WTI spread was coming down across the year. Then you had what happened on December 30th with the change to the policy allowing light oil to be exported. Then early January, President Obama was in Mexico, where the head of the Mexican state-owned oil company basically requested that they could have some of this light oil that the U.S. had. And the Obama administration said, sure, how about 100,000 barrels a day? So first you had this change on December 30th. Then you had the Mexico, they're calling it a swap, a request. But what the markets have seen is the ban is essentially being lifted in a lot of ways. And so on January 8th, West Texas Intermediate crude oil was worth more than Brent. So something, that's a spread a couple years ago that was almost $30. Now that's gone away. And that is directly a result of what the Obama administration has done and the fact that U.S. oil being produced in the U.S. is going to be being exported. And there are no set limits on how much.
Well, you just touched on something. You said this is a direct result of what the Obama administration has done. And even further than that, this, I don't know that you'd call it a surplus of oil, but that is also a direct result of what the Obama administration has done as far as their all-of-the-above energy policy. We have drilling happening in federal lands at a fevered pitch, record pace, never had this much before. Same thing with offshore. And so these oil companies for years have been telling us, look, if we want to be energy independent, let us just drill everywhere. And hey, Americans, you'll do great. Now that they've been allowed that, they say, yeah, but we're not making as much money because prices here have fallen, so we need to go sell this to other countries. So us poor little oil companies, we can still make our $40 billion a year in profit. And look, in the United States, we're very far behind when it comes to electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. So this, almost cut in half gas prices that we're seeing right now is a huge relief to a lot of Americans who have been struggling to pay for gas prices. I mean, that's not a stretch to say a lot of people have been unable to make ends meet, and falling gas prices is a huge boon for them. But of course, never enough for the dirty energy industry. They got to have that money, and the only way they're going to get it at this point, according to them, is to go sell it overseas. And so the Obama administration always more than happy to oblige with whatever the industry needs. And getting off of Obama for a minute and heading up north, Carol, Kinder Morgan, we've talked about them on this show before. They've got a couple other deeds happening up there in Canada. Lay out for us what's happening now.
Yeah, so the story this week with Kinder Morgan, so there's the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion proposal is underway in Canada. The review for that proposal is underway, and there are interveners in this process, so environmental organizations, citizens, experts, the province of British Columbia. All of these people are interveners in this review process, and throughout the process they've had a really hard time actually getting information from Kinder Morgan. So this latest story is about the province of British Columbia demanding that our federal regulator, the National Energy Board, actually compel Kinder Morgan to disclose their emergency response plan. It is surprising to a lot of people that an oil or a pipeline company that wants to expand its pipeline, triple its capacity, would actually not have to disclose its emergency response plan to the province in which it wants to expand this pipeline, but that is actually the case here. And the National Energy Board, our federal regulator, ruled in favor of Kinder Morgan, actually deemed that they indeed were allowed to keep this plan a secret. So the province of British Columbia, of course, was disappointed to see that this happened, and they pointed out that where the pipeline actually crosses the border and drops down into Washington State has all of that information. It's just when this pipeline is in British Columbia, they argued it was a matter of security. Kinder Morgan said it was inappropriate to release this kind of information for reasons of security.
One thing that we've seen, at least in the United States, anytime we have one of these coal ash spills or a chemical spill or an oil spill, the first thing that is asked typically by investigators is, let's go ahead and take a look at your emergency response plan, and more often than not, it doesn't exist. And that's why this story is very scary. I mean, this is a massive pipeline. This is not, water that they're transporting. This is, highly toxic stuff. And if they don't want to share it, this is pure speculation. But if they don't want to share it, there's a good chance it might not even exist. And I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you really think that they've got a detailed plan of exactly, how they're going to handle any kind of emergency?
Well, you bring up a lot of interesting questions. For one, there isn't a concrete plan yet for where the pipeline will actually travel in certain places. So they're going to be twinning the pipeline, and the actual, specific coordinates of where that pipeline is going to be is still undecided, which would lead one to think that they actually don't have a fleshed out emergency response plan for the entire pipeline. But the thing is, and this is another really important part, is that this pipeline has not yet been approved. It's been proposed, and we are going through our democratic process of asking questions of the company about this pipeline to determine if indeed it is in the best interest of the public, best interest of the province. Without this information, I spoke with one of the lawyers who is representing two major interveners in this case, and he just said, this is a breach of due process. Like, these interveners don't even have the necessary information to actually propose questions to this company to have a fulsome public hearing review process. So this, for the National Energy Board to rule in favor of Kinder Morgan in this instance and say, yeah, this information isn't necessary is a bit of a kick in the teeth for these interveners who have had to go through, thousands, tens of thousands of pages of information to try to actually understand the details of this complicated project and to be able to engage with the company in a meaningful way about it.
You know, you just brought up a great point, and that kind of leads us to our final story this week. You brought up the fact that is this pipeline within the best interest of the public? And here in the United States, the best interest of the public is a term that is currently being used by a few teenagers, believe it or not, to sue the government of Oregon to force them to have almost a disaster plan when it comes to how they're going to deal with the effects of climate change. And basically what they're hoping to do with this suit is force a precedent that will make other states and the federal government have to address this issue because it is in the public's interest. And not only address what they're going to do about climate change, but try to mitigate. And so I think this is a huge step. It's a very positive story that we have two teenagers, one age 18, one age 14, who have filed this suit against Oregon. And it brings up this question. And Justin, I want to start with you. These are teenagers. They will live probably most of their lives with the effects of climate change should it go unmitigated at this point. Do you think that this younger generation is where hope lies?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you bring up a very good point about living to see what's going to happen. And when you look at any of the predictions, anything past 2050 doesn't look so good. And so these people are going to be, that's when they're going to be having children. And so I do think that urgency and young people are going to play a big role. I know the divestment movement at places like Harvard, obviously being led by college students who also, similar in age to the teenagers in Oregon. So certainly, I think the energy and the people who are going to have to live with it are certainly going to be very motivated to deal with it.
Carol, what do you think about this essentially young generation of activists who say, look, stop ignoring the problem. We're the ones who are going to have to deal with it. We're the ones that are going to have to clean up the mess. Don't make it so bad for us. I mean, don't you find it a little bit inspiring that we do have so many young activists out there saying, fix this problem?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I do find it inspiring, and the young generation gets a pretty hard rap these days, and everyone's throwing around this word apathy, but I just don't think that is appropriate. We're seeing such incredible changes, and I think a really important change is when it comes to this question of public interest or best interests. For a younger generation, that involves an entirely different set of concerns than it does for, say, the baby boomer generation. For example, arguments for the economy really don't hold water with the younger generation who is inheriting a world that is full of multiple environmental crises, one of which is warming temperatures, but we've also got lack of freshwater resources, plastic in the oceans, biodiversity loss. This is the world that these kids are growing up into. And for them, a sense of political responsibility is very, very different than what we hear from the older generation, like jobs arguments. So these kids are bringing in a really new set of arguments and principles and values into these debates. And I think when you say, is there hope? I say, what we hope for is the future, and these kids really are the future. And with, back to the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, we saw pretty intense protests happening here. A lot of young people up on the mountain, Burnaby Mountain, where the pipeline is potentially going to be passing through, to protest that. And what they're doing is they're finding ways to register their dissent with the system, which, as we know, at the federal review level, is very undemocratic. So how do these kids weigh in? And they're, as you're saying with this court case, they're finding really interesting ways to do that. And personally, I find that really inspiring, and more power to them.
Well, Justin, Carol, thank you so much. It's a very positive story to end on this week. Everybody watching, you can find these stories and more, of course, DeSmogBlog.com, DeSmog.ca, and DeSmog.uk. And we will see you all next week right here on the DeSmogCast. Thank you very much for joining me, both of you.